Hi, everyone. I'm Lorna Schilling, President of Multnomah County Master Gardeners. I'd like to welcome you to our monthly speaker series. This month, we have the pleasure of a virtual weed walk to learn about common weeds and wild foods with Melany Vorass Herrera. Before we start, I'd like to let you know that Melany will be taking questions after her presentation. Please use the Q&A to ask your questions. You can use the chat for comments and we will post links there. So please submit your questions in the Q&A. And now I'd like to introduce our special guest. Melany Herrera is an Evergreen graduate whose studies focused on ethnobotany and environmental policy. She's retired now from her work that included protecting water quality, conducting environmental cleanups, and helping the regulated community comply with the Endangered Species Act. Her book, The Front Yard Forager, brings wild food right to your front door. And she has a website, frontyardforager.net, and I'm sure it'll show up in the chat also. Thank you. Thank you, Melany. Welcome.
All right, thanks, Lorna. And thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I'm not sure where you're all at. I'm in Olympia right now, and it's raining cats and dogs. And we had such a dry summer that until a couple of weeks ago, all of the weeds that I'm going to talk to you about tonight were pretty much dried up and gone. It was so droughty. But because we've had rain the last couple of weeks, some of those weeds are starting to reemerge and green up again. So a few of the ones that I'm going to talk to you about, even though we're entering the fall season and soon to be winter, you're going to be able to find in your own yard and garden very soon. So isn't that exciting? When I talk about this subject, a lot of folks kind of giggle and snicker about the idea of eating weeds. It sounds like a novelty, but I take this subject really seriously for a number of reasons. I want to tell you a few of the reasons why I really dig this subject. And let's see if I can get my screen to work here. There we go. Okay. So you heard Lorna say that my background is in environmental policy with an emphasis in ethnobotany. Most of the time, ethnobotanists are interested in learning about the plants that indigenous peoples used for plant food and medicine. But this urban foraging takes a little bit of a different tangent. We're looking at plants that were mostly brought over here from Europe and Asia as food and medicine plants, but by immigrants, not indigenous people. So these are the plants that grow around us that we know of as weeds. They're usually pretty rambunctious, especially in your flower or vegetable garden. I like them as food plants because, there's this idea of 100-year or 100-mile diet. So getting food locally has really gained a lot of popularity, and you can't get any more local than your front yard or your garden. The reason that's important is because it's really a function of time. When you get local food, it's less time on the grocery store shelf. So the more time the food spends on the grocer's shelf, the more nutrition it loses. In fact, studies show that some of our greens, like spinach and kale, lose up to 80% of their nutritional value over the course of just a few days. And most of the stuff we see in the grocery store has been there for at least a week or two. So that tells you a lot. When you pick it out of your yard, it's a yard to plate in minutes. So you're getting all that plant has to offer. The other part of the nutritional profile of these plants is they are not hybridized plants. There's a book by a woman named Jo Robinson called Eating on the Wild Side, the only book I'll tout as much better than mine. She talks about how much more nutritious plants are that are closer to their wild progenitor. So take, for instance, some of the carrots that you get in the grocery store. They've been hybridized over centuries, and with each hybridization, even if they're heirloom plants, and on the more nutritious side, each hybridization for things like shelf life, color, size, sweetness, you lose a little bit of nutritional value, or a lot. And I'll show you a graph on that in a minute. So when you're eating these wild plants, you're getting something that is leagues beyond what you're getting in the vegetable garden. I also like that we're talking about super fresh. There's no shortage of these. They're extremely abundant, delicious. Let's not forget that they're free. And by that, I mean pretty much labor free too. They don't require a lot of inputs. You don't have to water. You don't have to weed. Doing this activity puts you in touch with nature. It kind of shows you how generous the planet is. No, in our area, especially, there's really no reason to starve. It's easy. I'll talk to you a little bit about identifying plants, and it's really not as complicated as it seems a little bit overwhelming at first because we're all afraid of accidentally getting poisonous plants, but it's much easier once you get into it than you might imagine. And then finally, I like this because we're in an era of climate change, and these are the plants that are so resilient. They are proliferating in the face of all kinds of conditions that are making life difficult for other plants, are more the plants that we are coddling in our vegetable gardens. So with climate change comes different pests, different challenges with watering and so forth. And these weeds aren't really showing any signs of stress, the ones that I'm going to talk about. So those are just a few of the reasons. And I said I was going to just touch on nutrition and just how it stacks up. Some of these plants stack up against what we see in the store. So, spinach, I don't have kale on here, but you can see that something like dandelion is head and shoulders above spinach in some of the vitamins and minerals. Now, most of these plants have not been analyzed thoroughly for their nutritional profile. And that's because there's really not a big market for them. And without a big market for them, we don't have a lot of money to throw at that kind of analysis. But like I said, we can make some general assumptions about the nutritional quality of those plants just based on the fact that they haven't been hybridized. So again, one of the things that makes us a little bit cautious about going out there and picking things in the wild is just like, what are you going to run into? The first thing that people are wary of are toxic plants, and that's a valid concern, obviously. And there are a number of plants that can make you mildly ill. I'm happy to say in our region, there are only a small handful of plants that can make you violently ill or even kill you, a very small number. I'm not talking about mushrooms. There's a lot of mushrooms that can take you out. But in the vascular plant kingdom, there really aren't that many in this area. The three that I like to point out to be cautious of are that first picture there, the purple flowers. You're probably all familiar with the beautiful plant digitalis. And there's a fine line between medicine and toxin. It's all about dosage. This is used as a heart medication, but if you eat any part of this plant without it being processed to be a medicine, it can kill you pretty quickly. The second one in this picture is called poison hemlock. Another close relative is water hemlock. They both grow very common in our area. And what I want to point out about this plant is it looks quite a lot like Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is Daucus, or the same genus as, or excuse me, the very same species as our domestic carrot in the grocery store. So Queen Anne's lace is the same species, the very same plant, just hasn't been hybridized for color, flavor, sweetness, all of that. But if you're going to go out and look for Queen Anne's lace, you have to be very careful about its poisonous look-alike, because this poison hemlock is very deadly. This is the one that Socrates went out by. They're pretty easy to tell apart, though. So this is the only one that I'm going to talk about that has a poisonous look-alike. The way to tell them is Queen Anne's lace has hairs on the stem. They're very obvious. It's also a solid green colored stem, whereas the poison hemlock does not have hairs and it has purple splotches on the stem. Another key indicator is that the Queen Anne's lace, if you rub any part of the plant, it smells very much like carrots. And the hemlocks, the two hemlocks, have a really acrid smell. You probably wouldn't want to taste it if you smelled it. So those are some distinguishing features. Queen Anne's lace, we'll talk, I think I have that in a future slide. If I don't, I'll just say it right now. It's a wonderful plant. You can just throw some greens in your salad and get a little bit of carrot flavor. I don't even mess with the root because it's so spindly. It's not really worth the time and effort. The one on the far right is called Pacific Yew, and this is another one that's medicine or toxin. These beautiful little berries are very tempting for children, and they're actually sweet, and the berries are edible. But the seed inside is deadly. So if you can carefully eat around the seed, it's probably not worth the risk. So we leave that one alone. That one, it is a native plant in Western Washington and Oregon, and I think California. But you also see it in a lot of commercial landscapes. Another couple of things to be careful of with this urban foraging is you want to be careful about the land use that you're selecting from. So you keep away from pesticides, stay away from commercial landscapes, they're soaked, stay away from industrial pollution, probably stay away from high average daily traffic freeways like this top picture here. Although a lot of my professional life was spent in stormwater, and as long as you rinse your food off, you're not likely to get a lot of contaminants off the roadway. A good rule of thumb is if you're seeing 5 cars at a time on a road, it's probably not a good area to select near. If it's a neighborhood road where you're not seeing that much traffic, it's perfectly all right. Always rinse your food, though, because you're also dealing with animal feces and animal urine, be it dogs, cats, birds, all kinds of other critters. So those are a few things to look out for. And then I'll just touch on foraging etiquette. The first thing this is very important, to gain permission before you go picking. I've made many mistakes, very innocent mistakes. I thought that various pieces of property were vacant, and I was told otherwise while I was, mid picking, and that's kind of embarrassing. So I've learned the hard way that it's best to ask first. Sometimes if I see a big stash of something that I feel like, people probably aren't going to pick because they don't know the value of the plant, um, I'll leave a note, like a yellow sticky on someone's door with my phone number, and just ask them if I can come and pick it. And 9 times out of 10, they say, yes, please come and weed my yard and garden. I would love that. And then there's this rule of thirds. When you do find something that's just delectable, if you find a big patch of it, try not to go hog wild. Leave about 2/3 of it. So you're leaving some for habitat, you're leaving some for other foragers, and you're leaving some for the plant to regenerate more for you and others in the future. There are quite a few of these plants that if you just take a small amount, about 1/3, you can come back several weeks later and it's got a whole lot of new growth on it. Dandelions will do that, nettles will do that, any of these perennials. So with all those fears aside about, pollution and poisons and stuff like that, I'm just going to say that the safest place for you to forage is right in your own yard. And if you can let portions or all of your yard grow out a little bit, if you're not using herbicides in your yard, you'd be amazed at what a variety of weeds will come up right in your yard. I probably have 30 different plants just in my grass lawn that come up. If I let it grow 6 to 8 inches long, I can get enough for the dinner plate. And this is going to sound kind of weird, but none of these poisonous plants I just mentioned typically grow in a lawn. So I have a brother who used to tease me by sending me drawings of a lawnmower with, instead of a grass catcher, a salad spinner behind it, and joking that I could just, mow my lawn and eat right out of my lawn. He was teasing, but he was absolutely right. You can do that. Even the grass is edible. All these plants are edible, and they are absolutely full of nutrition. I'm going to show you in a few minutes how delicious you can make these plants. There's not a lot of bitterness. I talked to someone earlier about dandelions, but there are different ways you can prepare these foods that make them just as delicious as anything you'd find in the grocery store or in your garden. So let's get to the plants. The first one I'm going to start out with is a wonderful example of how misinformation about these wild plants gets spread. This is called wild pea, and I know you're familiar with it. It's an absolutely beautiful flower. It's a pretty rambunctious plant, and it's introduced. This is not native to the Pacific Northwest. Many foraging sources will tell you that this plant is toxic, and it simply isn't true. That rumor got started on a different species. There are quite a few different species in the pea genus and the pea family. This other plant was eaten in a drought-stricken area of northern India. They were eating about 30% of their diet. They were eating the dried peas as a flour. And over a number of years, the men began developing something called lathrosis, and it was a paralysis of their hips. And they discovered there's a toxin in that species that leads to this disease. And somehow that got spread across to a number of species in the same genus, including this plant. And so many sources insist that that's the case. But this plant here has been lab analyzed and does not contain that toxin. So you can eat the flowers. They taste just like fresh peas. They're beautiful in a salad. You can cook the tendrils. I stir fry them with garlic and soy sauce, a little splash of soy sauce at the end, and they're divine. We eat them all spring long. If you're worried about it, don't eat them regularly. Just eat them 3 times a week. I have a huge hedge of these at my stepson's house, and that's about, no, I can't say that. We probably eat them 5 or 6 times a week while they're in the early spring, while they're producing the young tendrils. So that's before the blooms actually come out. So you're taking those maybe 6 to 8 inches of the new growth. And then when the peas form, you'll find the peas are about half the size of a garden pea. So they're a little more tedious to collect, but you can use them just like peas. You can dry them and reconstitute them later. It's just a wonderful plant, and I highly encourage you to try this one when you get a chance next summer. These show up around June, and they really go all summer long. I'm still seeing some in flower, and we're in the middle of October. So if you do happen to find some still in flower, I encourage you to try the flowers. They're very yummy. Now, I mentioned carrots. Oh, good. We do have a picture, after all, of the difference between a Queen Anne's lace stem and a poison hemlock stem. So the Queen Anne's lace is in the middle. And like I said, it's a nice light green, um, real homogeneous tone. And the one on the right is the poison hemlock. And you can see the purple splotches are really obvious. And I apologize, the picture doesn't look as crisp as I'd like, but a crisper picture would show that there are absolutely no hairs on the poison hemlock. That picture on the left, those wonderful white umbels of flowers can be dipped in batter and frittered, and they're just have a very delicate carrot flavor. I like to use the top part of the plant. This is a biannual, so um, you're not if you take the entire plant, you're not taking out a perennial. I always kind of feel bad about removing a perennial, but this is just a biannual, so you can go ahead and collect the whole plant and experiment with the roots. Like I said, I've not found the roots to be worth the trouble. They're very hard to collect, and they're very small. They also usually have a pretty tough, fibrous exterior. So to get into the sweet, soft pulp, you're removing almost the entire root. But I encourage you to use the upper part of the plant, the flower, and like I said earlier, the greens are wonderful in a salad. You can cook with them too, but it's a delicate enough flavor that it's probably going to disappear in the cooking, the carrot flavor. Although I do put greens in soups, just like I would put carrots in a soup for a little bit of flavor. So that is a wonderful plant to know about. And then a third one, stinging nettles. Now let's talk a little bit about, well, first the advantages that this plant gives to our diet. This is a superfood, an absolute superfood. It's one of the highest protein greens that can be had. It's not typical to find a lot of protein in greens. In fact, most of these plants I'm talking about are good for vitamins and minerals and good for your health, but they don't have enough calories to sustain you. So if you're if you're doing this as a survivalist thing, you're going to have to find some other foods besides these foods, something higher in protein and higher in fats. But this particular plant does have a fair amount of protein in the leafy greens, so that's kind of unusual. It's also like really high in just about everything, all the minerals and all the vitamins. Um, it's it's high in it has quite a bit of silica in it. Now, some people take silica as a supplement um, for hair and nail growth. But if you get too much silica, it can bind with some receptors that would help you absorb other minerals. So these plants that are super high in silica, you don't want to eat all the time. Um, I would say these precautions I'm giving you are just don't get too carried away with them. These precautions are the same precautions I'd give to someone about sugar. Don't eat sugar every meal. Don't eat a steady diet of sugar because you might get diabetes. And that's the same kind of precaution I'm giving you here. Like you have to eat a lot of this over um, a steady period for it to cause you any harm. Um, so, what else do I want to say about nettles? Silica. Oh, so let me see here. Now let's go back. Hopefully you can see these tiny spines on the picture to the right. Um, these are called spicules. They're the things that sting, and they are comprised of that silica. This plant has a most ingenious defense system. So it pulls up silica out of the soil, and it basically makes these little glass hypodermic needles that are filled at the base with formic acid, the very same substance that ants use to trigger a histamine response when they bite you or sting you. So when you get stung by a nettle, you get a little histamine response and you itch. Some people swell a lot, but generally it's not anything terribly dangerous unless you are hypersensitive to it or have an allergy. In fact, they use it for sort of like Bengay for arthritis pain and stuff like that, like bee stings. Um, so the trick is how do you collect this stuff and use it in the kitchen without getting stung to death? Because it is kind of annoying. You don't want to be itching and stinging it. It lasts for a couple hours at least. So what I do is I wear long pants and some gloves, long sleeves, and I take a scissors. This is a cut and come again crop. So you can cut the top third and much like a mint, come back several weeks later and you'll have a new crop. Um, you'll see in some sources they say, oh, don't eat past a certain month or don't eat after it flowers. I don't subscribe to that. In fact, I say if you cut it and you get this new growth, it's just as good as any spring nettles. I have spring nettles and it's the middle of October, and it's because I've been out there whacking on them all summer long. So you cover yourself, you gather them in a bag, and you bring them back into the kitchen and still wearing your gloves. You plunge them into a pot and you fill that pot with maybe 2 or 3 inches of water and you steam them. And once they're wilted, the stingers are completely gone. Trust me on this, they're completely gone. Then you let that cool off. And when you have your cooled, um, stingerless greens, you can then remove the stems because the stems are a little bit tougher. So you can remove the stems and then you have a bunch of steamed greens to work with. So that's how I recommend doing it. It goes really fast. It takes about 5 minutes to steam something. You can also dry nettles, and they say that will remove the stingers. I've not found that to be true. They also say submerging them in water, a sink full of water will render them safe, and I've not found that to be true. You get to learn from all my mistakes. Um, but this steaming method is tried and true. Now you can use these raw. Some people do like to use them raw. Uh, if you have a food processor or something like a Vitamix and you pulverize this, people make raw nettle pesto and it's delicious. I actually haven't made it, but I've tasted it and it's wonderful. For any of you who haven't tried nettles like in a soup, uh, or even nettle broth. The flavor is one of a kind, and most people fall in love with it. It's really quite tasty. One last thing I want to say about nettles is this picture on the right you'll see is flowering. Once they go to seed, those seeds, towards the bottom, you see some seeds there. Those seeds are a very effective stimulant, quite a lot like coffee, maybe even a little stronger than coffee. I'm not into stimulants, so I haven't tried that, but there's quite a bit of literature on that, so good to know. All right, and now I want to talk to you a little bit about dandelion. Um, this was my first foray into urban foraging, and I was really reluctant to try dandelion because as a gardener, when I pull dandelions and I accidentally lick my fingers or get my fingers near my mouth, I experience that horrible bitterness that comes with handling dandelions and getting it in your mouth. Um, so I just, uh, wasn't real sure that I wanted to put dandelions in my salad or anything else. But I started working with young dandelion leaves. So in the early spring, that's a good time to start with this plant and get it before it flowers. And most of those aren't very bitter at all. You'll find a little bit of bitterness. But let me tell you something about bitterness in our diet. It's very important to stimulate your gallbladder and your liver so that you can metabolize all of those important minerals and vitamins. You need bitters. You actually need the experience of bitterness in your mouth to stimulate those organs to do their job. So I often teach people about how to tame the bitterness by using oil, salt, sugar, cooking it, but you really don't want to remove all that bitterness because your body benefits by it. Um, a lot of other cultures celebrate that flavor more than our culture does. But even in our culture, uh, as long as we're anticipating bitterness, we seem to have acquired an appetite for it in some areas. So, coffee, dark chocolate, um, beer. There are a number of things that we tolerate bitterness pretty well. We're just not used to experiencing it in a salad. Some people are fine with radicchio, bitter radicchio, and some other bitter greens, and some people aren't. But I encourage you to try to develop a taste for them because it's very good for your body. Now, having said that, there are some ways to remove the bitterness in even the older leaves in the dandelions. So you can, the midrib in a dandelion leaf is where most of that milky latex is contained. And if you fold the leaf in half and yank the midrib out, and when you start doing that, you'll see it goes very fast. Some people do this with their lettuce too, take the midrib out to remove some of the bitterness. So if you do that with dandelion leaves, you're getting rid of probably 60-70% of it. And you don't need to make a salad entirely of dandelion leaves. You can put 5 or 6 leaves in there, and you've effectively amped the nutritional value of your salad a lot. um, because it's just so much more packed with nutrients than anything that we're getting in the store or in our garden. So, just experiment with, maybe start with 2 or 3 leaves and chop them up small and sprinkle them through your salad. You're just adding vitamins and minerals to your regular meals. You don't have to change everything up all at once. You can just add a few of these plants here and there, um, and you'll see your courage with this stuff grows, and your palate begins to grow. You start, everything's an acquired taste. I don't know many people that liked broccoli when they were kids, but some of these things I was so afraid of bitterness at the beginning, and now I kind of like it. It's odd to say. Sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not. So a couple ways to deal with bitterness, though, is with um, salt and fat. And so some of these dishes in my book present dandelion recipes with some kind of fat in the mix, and that really does help it. Cooking also helps. Cooking also helps tame it. So dandelions make a wonderful steamed green, wonderful sautéed with a little bit of any kind of oil. Nuts are a nice add. Garlic is always a nice add. That's my foil for everything savory. Here we have a nice dish with goat cheese, and dandelions are a nice way to, goat cheese is really heavy, and dandelion greens kind of cut through that heaviness, so it's a really nice duo. So our next plant, by the way, my book, if you're interested, and I'm not making a lot of money off the book, I'm not trying to push it on you, but I do think it's good because it's not too overwhelming. It's just 30 super common plants, and each of the 30 plants has 2 recipes, 2 very simple recipes. So it's a nice introduction for how to use these in the kitchen. So the next plant is usually called bedstraw, and so named because when it's dried, it smells a little bit sweet, and it used to be used by indigenous people to stuff mattresses and pillows and beds. This is a plant that also takes up silica. So if it's a little bit older, it's going to be too tough to eat. It'll taste grainy, have a grainy mouthfeel. But in February, March, you'll begin to see this 6 to 8 inches tall. When it's nice and supple, not too impregnated with the silica, it tastes a lot like peas, and it makes a very nice fresh green. I don't typically cook with this because the flavor disappears. But, in February, March, our gardens are kind of, they're not cranking yet. And there's a dearth of fresh, available fresh green stuff out there. And happily, in the weed world, there are a few things that can be had even that early, even as early as January. So, but this one is more like February, March. By by the middle of May, end of May, this one is probably going to be too tough to eat. You'll see it looks a lot like, boy, see, it's after 6. Let's see if I can think of the name of the garden plant.
Looks
Oh,
like weed.
it's sweet woodruff is what I'm thinking of. So it's gallium is in the same. So gallium is sweet woodruff, and that's a ground cover in some of our landscapes or flower beds. So it's closely related to that. Sweet woodruff is also edible. Same thing though, it gets a little coarse as time goes on. So I guess I don't have a picture of it, but I also have I have steamed these, but like I said, it just loses some flavor. So I would eat this fresh. Tastes like peas. Now, this is one of my favorites, shotweed, because it's the bane of all gardeners. And And when I discovered this was edible and how delicious it is, I just couldn't believe it because I hated this plant. I would crawl around on my hands and knees and try to pull it all out before it goes to seed because when it goes to seed, you merely need to touch it and it sends seeds 10 feet off into every corner of your garden. Take your eye out. They just kind of explode all over the place, ergo shotweed. But this is in the mustard family, and as such, it is very good at pulling nutrients out of the soil. The brassicas or the mustards are all those healthy foods like broccoli, cauliflower, all the things that we talk about that are cancer preventives. This plant is in that family. And you can even see that by the tiny flowers have 4 petals like all mustards do. And then it looks a little bit like a bitter cress. It has the leaves are kind of laddered up the stem. In February, March, you'll see these as basil rosettes. And before they flower, they make an absolutely wonderful salad or sandwich green. And what I do is I wrap my entire hand like a claw around the top portion of the plant, pull it, I grasp this the stem area and twist and remove the entire root, and then I'm left with a handful of the greens. You can rinse those off, any dirt from your garden, rinse those off. You can leave the root lie. These are annuals, so you can leave the root lie and bring that in and just savor. It tastes like watercress. Watercress is a pretty expensive green if you go try to buy it in the store. This tastes just like it, and you know that it's just ubiquitous. You can find this stuff anywhere and certainly in your garden. I got so fond of it that for a time I would crawl around on my hands and knees, and instead of weeding, I would flick it to try to promote more of them. The other thing about these plants, as a permaculture person, I've done some study on, which weeds are beneficial to the garden. This weed, aesthetically, it's not very pleasing if you want nice straight rows with dirt between each row, but it's really not going to hurt your garden plants. It doesn't have a deep tap root that's pulling up water, robbing water from your other plants. In fact, it shades the soil a little bit. So it's one that I feel comfortable keeping in the garden. I no longer flick the seeds because, man, that got out of control in a big hurry. Um, but another thing I enjoy about this plant is, again, when there's nothing else growing in the garden, like even the kale has died back, you can find this in the garden and voila, you have fresh greens in your kitchen. It's just wonderful. I don't cook with this one much. I leave it raw because the flavor is so wonderful raw. Now, let's see what time it is. We got 15 minutes. So here you see it's a nice bed of greens, not just for looks, definitely for eating. Wonderful in a salad. It kind of fluffs up a salad, like you don't want to use a bunch of dandelion leaves by themselves because they just form a flat mat. But if you mix it with something with some texture like this shotweed plant, it fluffs a salad up and adds a whole lot of flavor. Now I'm going to touch on something that I used to think was dandelion, but it's a close relative. But this is called hairy cat's ear. Doesn't sound very appetizing, but this plant is much like a dandelion. Its flower is very similar. The flower usually grows a little lower to the ground, and the leaves are not as deeply serrated as you can see here, and they do have little hairs. My husband used to not like me putting this in the salad because he would feel those little hairs. And so he made me promise I would take them out, which I did for a time. But then then I found a really good patch of them once, and I thought, I gotta put this in the salad because they're hardly bitter at all. They're not like dandelions. And what I did is I just chopped them up smaller and snuck them into the salad, and he didn't even know the difference. He thanked me for pulling them out, and I said, well, actually, I've been putting them in there. You just didn't know it. These are nutritionally very similar to dandelions. They're very high in A and C. And you can, both dandelions and catsuar uh, are really drought tolerant, and you can get them almost all year long in our climate. They're not always beautiful to look at. Like I said, this droughty summer, by the end of summer, they were just curled up little leaves unless I could find them in the shade. But typically you can find these almost all year long. These you can pick and come back, and there will be new growth in a few weeks. So just leave a little bit so it can photosynthesize, and you can come back and get some more later. The nice thing about cooking with it is, unlike dandelions, they don't disappear. They'll hold up like a more uh, a sturdier green like kale, a little bit more like kale. So you could put them on a pizza. You can even put them in a grilled cheese sandwich, and you'll still see that green. Another common plant we have, this one is from the Mediterranean. It's introduced. All these plants were brought over as food plants, by the way. We have just forgotten how to use them, but these were all brought over by immigrants for use as food, some as medicine, but mostly for food. We started becoming ashamed of using them after the Great Depression. They were seen as poor people's food, and people didn't want to be associated with them. So hasn't been all that long that we haven't been eating these. Other countries eat these all the time. These are commonly eaten in European countries, especially Greece. So this one is related to the marshmallow. When if you chew up a leaf or any part of the plant, really, you'll notice a little bit of slimy feel. So it gets a little bit viscous in your mouth. And you can use this kind of like a thickener. So and the flavor is very mild. There's hardly any flavor at all, absolutely no bitterness. You can eat the leaves and the flowers. You can even eat the seeds. The seeds are wonderful, kind of nutty. We have several species of these that grow around here. These are related to, let's see, Rose of Sharon, hollyhocks, all of which are edible, by the way. Anything that looks like this malva, um, those are edible plants. Malvaceae, the whole dang family is edible. So, and most of them taste the same. They're pretty mild, and they have that, the word is mucilaginous mouth feel to them. That's off-putting to some people, but if prepared correctly, should be fine. So as a thickener, you can use it in a gumbo, and you'll see it retains its nice green color. The fruits are, like I said, kind of nutty flavored, and um, they feel like nuts when you're eating them. So you can put them in a banana nut bread. I am actually not sure what the nutritional profile of this plant is, or the plant part is. I haven't seen any analysis, but because it's not a heavily hybridized plant, I'm going to say it's pretty nutritious. Zooming right along here. This is the first time I've done this in an hour. I'm trying to go quickly. I hope I'm not overwhelming you. So this is chickweed, and you'll see this in March or April. Um, Depending on where this is growing, it can taste a lot like, people compare it to corn silk. I would just say corn. It tastes like young corn, young raw corn. I say depending on where it's growing, because sometimes it will pick up the soil terroir. So if you're in a forested area and there's a lot of leaf litter and maybe some mushrooms growing nearby, and sometimes you'll taste chickweed in an area like that, and it tastes a little like dirt or mushroomy, um, very earthy. It can pick up the soil's flavor. But if you're working in sweet soil, like in your garden, most of the time you'll find it tastes a bit like corn. Most people use this in sandwiches or salads as a fresh green, although if you find a huge bunch of it, it's also delicious steamed. You could even saute it with a little butter and garlic, one of my favorite go-tos. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. It's almost succulent. It's a very supple plant, very tender. So that's just a simple salad. You can make an entire salad out of this, or steamed as a side. Okay, and here we have clover. This is not as versatile. You can't really eat this raw. You can, but it's fairly coarse. But there are a number of these plants that, if you have the right kitchen utensils, you can make several dishes with them. What I like to do with clover, and it's very nutritious. Clover is highly nutritious, both pink and white. Um, is just go ahead and grab it by the handfuls, uh, steam it or boil it, and make a cream of clover soup. So if you have a Cuisinart a food processor or a Vitamix, you can add a few soup ingredients and make a simple puree, and it's really quite wonderful. You can also make uh, pesto with any of these. You can make pesto, just same ingredients as basil pesto, but exchange for these greens, and maybe up the garlic a little bit for additional flavor, and you've got a very nice pesto. Oh, here we go, clover pesto. And cream of clover soup. And I think we're nearing the end here. This is one you'll see a little later in the spring, and it takes on many forms. Most people do not know about this, but once you learn it, you'll see that it grows everywhere. You'll find it everywhere. It's also in the aster family, like the hairy catseer and dandelion, so it has those composite flowers with many petals. Um, Let's see if I have another. No, I don't. But it's kind of a dandelion-like flower. But if you get it young, you'll see the leaves are nice and broad like this. They're quite tender, very little bitterness, if any. This is great in a salad, though it's a little bit hairy. We love it steamed or sauteed. And yeah, this is really versatile in the kitchen. So nipplewort. I usually get a few giggles because it's nipplewort. The reason it's called nipplewort is there are a couple of little appendages at the bottom of the leaves, kind of at the base of the stem. And somebody thought those looked like nipples. And because in folk medicine, sometimes there's a visual association with a potential remedy. So apparently, this plant, because of those nipple appendages, came to be used as a salve for chapped nipples for nursing women. So that's the story there. But Lapsana, this is a really good plant to know about. Very versatile in the kitchen. Like use like spinach. I would say you can substitute anything with spinach. I want to touch on Japanese knotweed. This is oh gosh, my environmentalist folks are terrified of this plant. It's very rambunctious. Um, and yeah, I'll skip my spiel on invasives. I have really mixed feelings about how we're dealing with invasives. Most quote unquote invasive plants combated with herbicides. And for me personally, two wrongs don't make a right. I don't like the idea of putting a bunch of stuff down on the soil that's going to persist for decades. A better way for me would be to just eat our way out of this. And that might sound preposterous, but let me tell you, anytime we develop a market for something, we drive it darn near to extinction. So I'm pretty sure that this would be one of those plants that if we could make it popular, and in some countries it is quite popular. Um, I don't know if you know about resveratrol. It's a supplement you can get from a supplement store for cancer prevention and longevity. Most of that resveratrol, which also comes in grape skins and blueberries, stuff like that. Most of the resveratrol you find in a supplement store is sourced from Japanese knotweed. So there is a very good use for it that way. But also, you see this younger one on the right. Um, if you find them young enough, you can peel that, you take the leaves off, peel the young stem, and use it very much like rhubarb. It has a slightly sour taste. And so you can make chutneys and muffins and rhubarb crisps and all that kind of stuff. The Navajo tribe has discovered that you can also eat the leaves, and they've begun eating the leaves. I just heard that, and I've been experimenting with leaves too. So, so I encourage you to look for that in the early spring, about the same time of year that horsetail starts emerging. If you start seeing 6-inch tall horsetail, which is also edible, that's about the right time to look for this young stuff. You see here, I've peeled it. You can freeze it just like you might freeze rhubarb. And then you can make all kinds of wonderful things with that. All right. Oh, I can't believe we did it. 4 minutes to go. Okay, so if you're interested in the book, the best place to get it is the Mountaineers. That's the publisher, but also any major online bookstore, Amazon or Barnes and Noble has it too. So that's all I got for you tonight. Now we'll open it up for questions. Yes?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. So I'm wondering, in the late summer when everything has kind of been there a while, are things like the dandelions and the other weeds more bitter and not as good to eat, or are they just less available?
Great question. One of the reasons that they're going to be more bitter is because there's less moisture and everything in those plants is more concentrated. So you could look at it another way. You're getting a more nutritious, less watered down plant at that time of year. The thing that prevents me from eating them later in the year is some of them begin to get kind of coarse, and it just means you got to chew longer. But the way around that is not all those plants are going to be that way. Out in bright sunlight, yes, but if you can find some shady margins, you're going to find some very edible plants all summer long for most of these.
Yeah, we just finished our wild peas, so oh man, I have to wait for a while. Um and if you're eating raw, what is your recommendation on washing things?
Oh, that's a great question. So I am very cautious about pollution, and this discussion around eating things next to the freeway. It's not just things next to the freeway or a roadway. Um, there was an EPA study done on the Salinas Valley, the lettuces and stuff that grow there, to see what kind of contamination deposits on those plants out in even organic farms. And they found that those contaminants were just as high on the farms as they were next to a freeway. That's because once these things are airborne, they float around and then they deposit somewhere. So it's kind of some of these things are ubiquitous. So regardless of whether you're foraging in the grocery store or out in nature, I recommend filling a sink of water or a pot of water, submerging your plant material and letting it sit for 5 minutes, a good 5 minutes. Let it sit for 5 minutes and then come back and swish it around and then rinse it off and then send it through a salad spinner. That's good enough.
Yeah, that's good. Um, yeah, we have a comment that they liked your idea of marketing Japanese knotweed.
Do
And
it.
yeah, yeah, and a question, do you dedicate an area of your yard to the plant to, weeds or to encourage their growth, or do you let them grow where they want?
That's a good question. I love that question. So, my husband and I moved to Olympia 8 years ago. Before that, we lived in Seattle on a double lot, uh, right in town. And he had a vegetable garden. I used to do the weeding, and that was partially how I discovered this whole thing. Was I started to wonder if what I was pulling out had any benefit. And the more I learned about the plants, so I was killing more biomass than we were collecting for from
In
the
your
vegetable.
garden, yeah.
And um, we still have a vegetable garden, definitely. I love my vegetable garden. Um, but when we were up there, I did dedicate a big swath of my yard to a weed garden. So I took a bunch of dandelions, intentionally planted them. I intentionally planted nettles. I had nipplewort, all kinds of things, and that was a beautiful, lush. Didn't require any inputs here. My husband's laboring away over there, watering things and weeding things. I didn't have to do a thing, and I had, copious greens coming out of my intentional weed bed. Now, the issue with it though is that the seeds do float around. If you got neighbors with a garden right next to that, they're not going to like you very much. My husband was not real happy with my weed seeds floating over into his garden. So I don't know. You got to weigh those things.
With caution, yeah. Yeah, my mom used to always want me to get rid of the chickweed, and I'm like, no, we want more next year.
Good.
My cockatiels love the chickweed. Um, so another one is any comments about purslane?
Oh, yes. So, purslane, gosh, uh, yeah, that's really high in the good omegas, the good omega fatty acids. Um, Very
Interesting.
healthy plant. And if you can get it going in your yard, it probably isn't going to stop. It seems to be a little bit picky about where it grows. I struggled to get it to grow in my yard here in Olympia. It's more or less a succulent plant. It is from the Mediterranean. It likes a warmer climate. Once you get it established, um, it can tolerate some pretty droughty conditions. So it's just a wonderful salad green. It's crispy, crunchy, good on sandwiches. Some people use the seeds. They're minuscule, but if you're down with collecting the seeds, apparently they're really healthy too. That's a wonderful plant to know about. And if you can get it going in your yard, I highly recommend it. It's along with shotweed, um, chickweed that you just mentioned,
Yeah.
and purslane. In the permaculture world, all three of those are really good ground covers in your vegetable garden. They're good soil protectors and shaders.
Yeah, and all three of them are not hard to get rid of if you need to get rid of them.
Absolutely right. They're
They're
not
not like, bindweed where you can pull
right.
that for the rest of your life and not be done.
Yes. Oh, if only bindweed was edible.
Yeah, well,
Not.
Do you know of nutritional value to dandelion flowers and infusions?
I do not. I know that, well, I stay away from the subject of medicinal values, but dandelion, well, the whole dandelion plant is used as a diuretic and for other medicinal purposes. Um, I know that a lot of people, including my husband, make dandelion wine with the flowers. But no, I don't know what the nutritional value is there. Um, I'll look it up.
Good. If somebody found out, but they probably did because those have been around a
The
while.
dandelions have been studied a fair amount, so I bet you that data is out there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the clover, do you eat the flowers also?
You can eat the flowers in a salad. There's a little bit of nectar at the base of each of the little florets, so they're going to be a little on the sweeter side. Yeah, flowers are good, and they're not as coarse as the leaves are. The leaves are really fibrous, so I wouldn't put the leaves in a salad. They need to be chopped up somehow.
We used to pick off the little pieces of clover and suck on the end of it for the sugar.
Yep, I remember that too.
Haven't done that in a while. Do you have any recommendation for weeds that would grow well in containers on purpose for edible purposes?
Any of these. That's a great thought too. Actually, somebody just gave me, like I said, I was struggling with the purslane, so I'm growing it in a container because I haven't been able to get it to take off in my yard, and the purslane is growing quite nicely in a container. Any of these will do well in pots. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're really sturdy plants. They take a lot of abuse. Um, so even if you even you can almost take them out and you add a little water when they're super stressed and they'll rebound back like, there's just hardly any problems with them. It's the answer to climate change, I swear.
Oh,
These are
yeah,
the
probably.
these are the plants that might sustain us if everything else fails.
Yeah, my stepfather is concerned about the apocalypse or whatever, and I'm always like, well, we've got a lot of things to eat here. It's not a problem. It's like he wanted to have us store up seeds, and it's like, well, if something happens, how long is it going to take you to grow out those seeds? And in the meantime, you're hungry.
True.
So,
You bring up an interesting point. There's an interesting intersection between on one end of the spectrum, we have conservative, um, what they call preppers.
yeah,
So people preparing for the end times. And then the other end of the spectrum are the hippy dippy
yeah.
flower children. And they all seem to now be interested in these edible weeds. And so when I teach a workshop, I sometimes get 50-50.
Yeah. Well,
It's
just don't talk
great.
politics and you'll be good.
Exactly. Well, we all got to eat. That's the thing.
Yeah. Talk about eating. Yeah. I don't think we have any more questions, and I have really enjoyed this.
Okay, me too. Thanks. And thanks again, everybody, for coming. Really enjoyed doing this.